I got two here. I'm going to talk about incitement to apostasy and blasphemy. One of the things we're trying to do here with this conference is we're not trying to say we have all the answers to the questions. Okay? We don't have all the answers to all the questions. We believe the Bible tells us how to deal with these problems. And it's not the Bible's fault, or it's a problem with the Scriptures being unclear. A lot of it is our paradigms and the way we think about things. Okay? Unfortunately, this is a Christian paradigm. I'm not saying it's the right Christian paradigm, but it's a paradigm that is attributed to Christians in our society, and they share this with the pagans, is that they approach biblical law like it's a bad idea. That's the general default factory setting of your basic Christian. They approach the law of God assuming it's a bad idea right off the bat. What we're trying to do in this conference, and conferences like these, in our books, in our podcasts or debates, we're approaching the law of God like it's a good idea. Like this makes sense, this is wise. And when you do that, you start to gain wisdom from it. And if you don't do that, you start to put your own wisdom on it. You've heard people say, well, we can't just take biblical law and dump it on the Constitution, right? That won't work. You know why that won't work? Because you've already taken the Constitution and you've dumped it on biblical law. That's why. That's why you're saying that. You found it wanting. So we're going to look at these laws and we're going to glean wisdom from them and see why would God do this and call his own law wise? When he says in Deuteronomy 4, all the nations are going to look at you guys and be like, wow, these are amazing laws. These are pretty great. You guys, what other nation has laws like these? That's the literal phrase, laws like these. Laws like these, okay? First one. Here is the application of Deuteronomy 13, 6 through 11. If your brother is son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife you embrace, or your friend who is as your own soul entices you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, some of the gods, the peoples who are around you, whether near you or far from you, from the one end of the earth to the other, you shall not yield to him or listen to him, nor shall your eye pity him, nor shall you spare him, nor shall you conceal him, but you shall kill him. Your hand shall be first against him. There's that principle again there. How'd that get in there? Wow, that's crazy. Where's the general equity? It's not anywhere. Against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. You shall stone him to death with stones, because he sought to draw you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and all Israel shall hear and fear and never again do any such wickedness as this among you. Okay, so there's a promise in here that as soon as you have a case like this and you execute it faithfully, that's going to send a message through the rest of the land, and they're going to get the message. That's a promise. They're going to get the message. So let's look at the wisdom of this law. First, we have to ask the question: how can anyone prove this happened? Look. Let us go and serve other gods, but they're secretly. They're secretly doing this. How in the world can you prove that this person came and whispered to me? Hey, he whispered it to me. Well, do you have any witnesses? No, it was just me. I heard it. Right? So how can God put a burden like this on the accuser? You can't spare him or conceal him nor pity him, all that kind of stuff. But if it's just me that they're whispering to, how do I enforce this? Right? So the first relevant question is, how can you prove this happened? Let's look at some relevant texts. A single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. In no case of a capital offense or any offense that he has committed shall one witness suffice for you to punish that person. Okay? You got to be 2 or 3 witnesses, always. You understand? So how in the world, if it's your wife, that was the example given, if it's your wife who's secretly whispering to you and you alone, how in the world can this person be punished? Let's look at some lessons of this law. This law obviously requires a high burden of evidence. Get George Michael out of your head right now. This is not a careless whisper. And that's the last time you'll hear me talk about George Michael. We're not talking about somebody who just said, I wonder if God is real. We're not talking about someone who says, man, I'm struggling with my faith. We're not talking about that type of person, okay? This is not what this is describing. We are describing somebody who's become militant, who's been militarized, okay? So this requires a high burden of evidence. This is not somebody who just kind of is wondering aloud about God, okay? We're not talking about that kind of person. Remember the instances given. We're talking about your son, your daughter, your wife, your mom, your dad, people who are very close to you, okay? There is going to be about 1,000 steps taken before you bring this person up to it. Did you talk about your loved ones, right? So we're not talking about just somebody casually wondering and grab him, stone him. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something that can be proven in court. Do you understand? Deuteronomy 13, 6-11 cannot be applied unless it can be proven in court with 2 or 3 witnesses. So this is not something you're going to see very often at all. Okay? This is not something that's going to be commonplace. This requires a high burden of evidence. If this person is secretly whispering to you, and it's your wife or your husband or whatever, you have to somehow get 2 or 3 witnesses. This has to become so bad that you need to get 2 or 3 witnesses involved. That's how bad it's become. So remember the instances given. We're not just talking about some stranger on the street who says, I don't believe in God. Okay? That's not who we're talking about. Again, here's the principle. Your hand shall be first against them. Who are you putting your hand, in the instance given, who are you putting your hand against? Your own family. So this is not something that is going to be seen regularly. This is something that is so bad, it's pervasive, it's causing destruction of your family already. Do you understand? This is not something that's a casual wondering about the Trinity. Okay? This is something that you can prove in court, and you have so much conviction about this, you're willing to take your loved one to court about it. You understand? That's the kind of case we're dealing with here. Okay? So you're not really going to see this very often. And as far as I know, I don't know of any instance in Scripture where this happens. The enforcement of this law ends religious plurality in the country. Anyone who goes out into the public sphere and begins preaching actively a different God is now taking their life into their hands. Because now it's not hard to prove. And if God is saying even your own family members are not exempt from this law, can you imagine what a casual street preacher who goes out in the street and says, I'm going to start worshiping Muhammad now. I'm going to start promoting Hinduism. I'm going to begin proselytizing. I'm going to begin preaching different gods. Do you understand? This law ends religious plurality, and I got to go back to the Constitution here. They did not spell this out for us. They left ambiguous language so that people 250 years later can interpret it with reason. I'm not saying it's a good reason, but with a certain amount of reason that they meant all religions. I think they're wrong. I don't think that's what the Founding Fathers meant. But unfortunately, since they instituted their own law and didn't institute this law, now we have to fight against the Muslims in our own country. Now we have to deal with secular humanism and 70 million dead babies. Because they weren't specific enough. Because they tried to institute their own law. I get why they did it. I understand. I get it. But this is the peril. People start dying when you don't do God's law proper and you reduce God's law to just principles. We're not talking about innocent questions and casual wonderings and theological discussions, but we're talking about militant proselytization. Okay? That's what we're talking about here. I'm assuming a theonomic framework. I'm assuming the same thing that God is assuming, that everyone in the nation knows God's law and knows that when you secretly entice your loved ones to serve other gods, you're taking your life into your own hands. And they still do it. They care so much about this new God or whatever, they're willing to take their life in their hands. They're willing to put their life on the line to promote this false deity. That's the kind of person we're talking about here. We're not talking about someone just casually wondering about theology. We're talking about, and this is, we're never talking about someone who changed their belief. We're talking about someone who says, I changed my belief and so should you, and I'm willing to put my life on the line for it. That's what we're talking about here. That's what this verse is referring to. Deuteronomy 13 is not talking about some casual questioning. I'm questioning my faith. Oh, I'm deconstructing. Not talking about that. We're talking about somebody who has become militant and is willing to put their life on the line. This would affect whom you marry. We have a very low premium on the spirituality of our spouses these days. Very low premium. You don't want to marry someone who's going to change their faith later on in life and say, hey, I don't believe this anymore. Let's go serve other gods. You're going to be much more careful about who you marry because it could destroy you and it could destroy your family if you're not careful enough. Much higher premium on marriage. This will affect what you teach your children. You don't want to be teaching them in such a way that later on in their life they're like, never mind. This will affect with whom you associate if we have this law. You don't want to be hanging around somebody who's going around secretly teaching people, hey, let's stop serving the Lord. You're going to be much more careful about whom you associate with. Trips to the bar, might see a rapid decline. Okay. Remember this verse right here? Because people are like, oh, but it's my wife and my children. Oh, this is so harsh. Hey, remember this one? Remember that one? Maybe just a little new meaning to this one here. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Remember that one? Oh, who said that one? That's an Old Testament passage, right? We just read it in the Old Testament. No, it's a New Testament passage. That was Jesus Christ himself. He's not saying kill your wife and family. He's not saying that. He's not saying that you should actively hate your family. He's not saying that. What he is saying, your allegiance to me must surpass that of your loved ones. And that's what Deuteronomy 13 is telling you. Your allegiance to God must surpass that of your loved ones. And if anyone tries to turn you away from your allegiance to God, they're taking their life into their hands. That's the application of that. Now let's quickly go into blasphemy here. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, bring out of the camp the one who cursed, and let all who heard him lay their hands on his head. Let all the congregation stone him, and speak to the people of Israel, saying, whoever curses his God shall bear sin. Whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him, the sojourner as well as the native. When he blasphemes the name, shall be put to death. Did you know that was given in the context of lex talionis? Did you know that? Eye for an eye. Did you know that? Right after this verse right here, he says, whoever, plucks out an eye will get his eye plucked out. Whoever, loses a tooth, makes someone else lose a tooth will make it. He gives the law of lex talionis right after this. This is God's lex talionis. You can't poke out God's eye. You can't make God lose a tooth. You can't cut off God's hand. If you blaspheme God, that's his lex talionis. That's his eye for an eye. If you attack his reputation, you forfeit your life. Right after this passage, he gives lex talionis. This is given in the context of lex talionis. So for anyone who's like, well, it's just the second table, we can't enforce the first table, it's very interesting to me that God gives this law, and then later, right after this passage, he gives lex talionis, and then after he gives lex talionis, that's when they put this person to death. We're not talking about profanity, taking God's name in vain. There's a difference, different words, different meaning. Not someone who just casually takes the Lord's name in vain or uses God's name as if it's nothing. We're not talking about that. That word is sav. So, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. That's the word there, in vain, sav, right? Which means emptiness, vanity, falsehood, no meaning, right? You're using it neutrally. And in using it neutrally, you use it negatively, okay? That's what profanity is. We're not talking about that. We're talking about blasphemy, nachab, to pierce, perforate, bore, or a point. An attack. I'm attacking the name. I'm not just using it like it's neutral. That's profanity. I'm attacking actively, publicly, God's reputation. That's what blasphemy is. And it's interesting, in Numbers 15:30, we heard from those judges, a lot of translations, Whoever does anything with a high hand, a lot of translations put it, blasphemes his God. Blasphemes his God. You've attacked God's reputation by attacking his law. Let's learn some lessons. This protects God's reputation. The only time you talk about God is with holiness and reverence. Just like Moses, take your sandals off your feet. If your place you're walking is holy ground. You treat God's name like it's holy. It's not like any of the other words. Okay? God's law is not the F-bomb. Do you understand? God's name is not the F-bomb. Okay? God's name is not the S-word. There's profanity and there's bad language. God's name and reputation occupies a completely different space. Do not put profanity on the same level as blasphemy. Two different things. You cannot profane your way into a capital offense. You can blaspheme your way into a capital offense. A lot of Christians, we do that. We put profanity on the level of blasphemy. Oh, saying the F-bomb is worse than taking the Lord's name in vain. I've seen people, they'll casually take the Lord's name in vain, or they'll blaspheme God, but they'll never drop the F-bomb. Only God's name occupies that space. Let's not put anything else up there with it. This exalts God standing among the people. When people come to visit us, they'll notice there's something holy with these people. There's a line they won't cross with God's name. They won't say it casually. Whenever they talk about God, it's only positively because they fear the Lord and they fear the abuse of his name. This puts power, and that results in putting power in the name of God. We do believe that there's power in the name of Jesus, especially when we're talking about demonic activity, things like that. But the person who does anything with a high hand, whether he's native or sojourner, that one is blaspheming. I talked about that already. Just think about how many times the Bible talks about for my name's sake. He doesn't say for me, he says for my name's sake. I'm doing this for my reputation, to uphold my name. The name of the Lord is excellent in all the earth. For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake. 1 Samuel 12:22. He restores my soul. He leads me on paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Psalm 23. Likewise, when a foreigner who is not from your people Israel comes and from a far country, for the sake of your great name, for the sake of your great name, your great reputation, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. Luke 21:17. Those are the laws pertaining to incitement to apostasy and blasphemy. I hope what we talked about today will bless you and your understanding of God's law and the wisdom behind it. Thank you very much.